Thank you, Judge. So I'm glad to be back here in Stoverstown. You all get the reference. We were looking at the program over here, and I was mentioning all the last names that were familiar from the book. And Bill Stover was one that, well, we were pointing out last names that were still current in town here. And Mr. Stover, your name came up. Your name is up here, I think, 3 times. Can we have a vote? All in favor of returning the town's name to Stoverstown? Raise your hand. I mean, that was the real name, and it was a bunch of guys in Richmond who decided it wasn't going to be called that anymore. I don't know. You guys going to take that? Yeah? You're going to keep? Okay. All right. This is from a pension application of a militiaman from the Revolutionary War from Shenandoah County. And you'll note, if you can read his script, and I've transcribed it here, when he was called into service, he was living in Stoverstown, Shenandoah County, New Virginia. Now, I don't know if you all know this, but in Revolutionary times, this was considered New Virginia. And it wasn't just the Shenandoah Valley. It went north of here, and it went all the way down to, past Roanoke to the Cumberland Gap. Anything on the other side of the Blue Ridge was considered New Virginia. The term Old Virginia, as in carrying me back to Old Virginia, is more familiar still. But for, I don't know how long, decades, people referred to this part of the country as New Virginia. And it didn't really continue further west. If you got to Kentucky, that was Kentucky country. So New Virginia was a particular geography. And when I stumbled on this, I actually searched. There's a database of Revolutionary War pension applications online. And I searched for New Virginia, and virtually every reference says that, I, so-and-so, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, from what used to be called New Virginia. So they stopped calling it that. And even these veterans, they referred to it saying, in the old days, we called it that. So it's an interesting little thing. I thought I'd start by sharing that in honor of Bill over here. You all, I figured, needed a map to know where you are tonight, so I drew this for you. This is the political geography at the time of the Revolutionary War. Shenandoah County, of course, was Dunmore County, and Berkeley County had not been split into Jefferson, and what's the other one? Mineral County, I think. Morgan County, yeah. And of course, the settlers who lived here largely came via Pennsylvania, Germans and Scotch-Irish, down the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road, otherwise known as Route 11. The vast majority of them got off of boats from southwestern Germany or Northern Ireland at Philadelphia or nearby ports like Lewis, Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, and migrated west and came here. So culturally, back then, this was sort of an extension of the Pennsylvania Dutch country. And if you go up to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is the famous Pennsylvania Dutch country, you'll see lots of Northern Irish political geography with North Ireland inspired names. So it was mixed all along. So you all probably know who Yost Haidt was, the leader of the first large colony, they called it, of Germans who came here. This is his house in Pennsylvania. He built it, I think, in 1718. The right 3 bays are original. It was expanded later. And he left there in the very early 1730s to come down here. And here, this is a partial family tree. So you'll see Yost Haidt up at the top, and 3 of his children. He had more children than this. But Mary Haidt married George Bowman in Pennsylvania before they came down here. And Mary and George had a bunch of kids. 4 of them grew up to be very prominent and moved west as pioneers, and I'm going to speak about some of them. One of them, Abraham Bowman, was the subject of my presentation when I spoke to you last time. But I'm going to talk to you about Elizabeth Bowman, or Elizabeth Ruddle, and some of the others tonight a little bit. And I'm going to say less about Abraham because you got a whole hour from me on him once before. And then Isaac Haidt Sr. And his son Isaac Haidt Jr., who built Belle Grove Plantation. Elizabeth Haidt married Taverner Beale, who you might not know too much about. He lived at Mount Airy, which is in the southern end of the county near Edinburgh. And he was a very prominent man in the county at the time, both in the military and in local governance. So just a little bit of genealogical reference there. You all know this house. I understand it's open for visitors tomorrow. That was the Bowman house. For a long time, it was believed that it was built in the 1750s. It appears it was built a little bit later than that, although at least one person has disputed that to me. But that was an important house in the Revolutionary period and earlier, and there was a log version of it earlier than that. I told this story last time I was here, but I can't be in Stoverstown and not mention it. This is the Miller Bible in the museum that we are honoring tonight. I won't tell the whole story. Did I hear somebody clap?
Yeah.
Were you clapping for me or for the Bible?
Bible.
The Bible, okay. That was the right answer. Most of you must know the story, and I'm not going to tell it in detail, but during the actually Pontiac's rebellion between the French and Indian War and the Revolution, a local no-goodnik raided the Miller family's farm and murdered them all, except for their youngest daughter who was in the house sick. And then they set fire to the family Bible, strangled the family cat, and threw it on top of the Bible. It's pretty awful stuff. That's like horror movie stuff, right? And the Bible survives, and it's in your museum. And I read about that story years ago when I was doing my research, and then I discovered that the Bible still existed. And it was in a museum in Strasburg, and I had to go see it. And a couple of you helped me do that a few years ago. So thanks again for that. So here I mentioned that 4 of the Bowman children grew up to be quite prominent. They were very early explorers and settlers of Kentucky, which at that time was part of Virginia. Virginia, I read yesterday, at the time of the Revolution, was bigger than California and Texas combined.
Whoa.
Right? Part of Minnesota was Virginia back then. So that gives you a sense of how big it was. Wisconsin, entirely part of Virginia. Michigan. So Abraham Bowman, you all know about. He was the original lieutenant colonel and then the colonel of the 8th Virginia Regiment. He was a lieutenant colonel under Colonel Peter Muhlenberg, and then when Peter Muhlenberg was promoted to general, he was elevated to colonel. John Bowman, who was older, he was the first county lieutenant of Kentucky County. Yes, Kentucky was a county of Virginia. County lieutenant meant he was the head of the militia, and he was there very, very early. Joseph Bowman was second in command under George Rogers Clark when they went on the Cahokia expedition in Illinois in 1778, and then the Battle of Vincennes in 1779. Without that expedition, Illinois might be part of Canada today. That's how important that expedition was. The 13 colonies didn't really go that far west then, despite what Virginia said about its claims. And England probably would have held that territory were it not for these guys. In which case, Wisconsin and Illinois would be part of Canada probably today. And Isaac Bowman was part of that as well. So all 4 of these guys are from Strasburg. They grew up on the banks of Cedar Creek in the house that I showed you a few moments ago. But they all moved away. This is Long Meadow. It was built in 1848 on the foundations of a house called Travelers Hall. So Travelers Hall was built by Isaac Height Sr., son of Yost Height. When he died, his son Isaac Height Jr. split the property in 5, and he built Belle Grove. The original house, which was wood, we don't know what it looked like, but this house was built on its foundations. This is a picture of a house that was torn down years ago in Kentucky. That's roughly the same proportions, so I just put it there to show you what Travelers Hall might have looked like during the Revolutionary War. And there's Isaac Height Jr. You've all seen that original painting, probably. It's at Belle Grove. So here's another house, Height House. So, according to the National Registry of Historic Places, the first story of the log portion of that house was built by Yost Height. I'm not sure that that's certain, but it was certainly built by the Height family because they owned it, and very early, 1732. The register says 1731, but that sounds early to me. So just the first story of the log portion. It was then owned by Jacob Height, who was Yost Height's, I think, oldest son. It's called Prato Rio now. Jacob Bowman owned it and expanded it and then went bankrupt. This house is Adam Stevens' house up in Martinsburg. Adam Stephen was the sheriff. You know what sheriffs do when you owe people money, right? They come and take your stuff. So Adam Stephen came and he took Jacob Bowman's property, his livestock and his live people, the slaves he owned. And he put the livestock in the stables and put the slaves in the jail. Well, the Height family didn't like that very much. That, by the way, there's no portrait of Adam Stevens, so that's his waistcoat from the French and Indian War. It's in the Smithsonian. So the Height family didn't like that very much. So this guy, Daniel Hendricks, who was, I don't think he was a Height, but he was a friend of the family and supposedly 7 feet tall. He went to the jail, and that is the old Frederick County jail door, with an axe, and broke it open and freed the slaves. I can't really say freed the slaves, but got the slaves out and returned them to their owner. Did the same thing with the livestock. And was a big hero. Now, Jacob Height, because he was bankrupt, he left Virginia for a new life in South Carolina. There was land available in South Carolina, so he went south. More about him soon. But because he gave up his house, a gentleman who lived up that way named Horatio Gates, this is a name people know, he was a general in the Revolutionary War. He advised his friend Charles Lee that there was a property available. Charles Lee had recently arrived from London. He was a former officer in the British Army and didn't like the king. In fact, his politics were pretty radical. And so he decided to buy the Jacob Height's property and moved in. And he's the one who named it Prato Rio. And he became a major general in the Continental Army. Horatio Gates became a major general in the Continental Army. And the sheriff, Adam Stephen, became a general in the Continental Army. None of them ended their careers well, by the way. they all finished in shame. So remember, the Heights don't like Adam Stephen. So when the Revolutionary War is brewing and Governor Dunmore has fled the colony, the House of Burgesses has reconvened as the Virginia Convention, which is sort of a shadow government. They don't pass laws. At first they make recommendations, and then they get braver and they pass what they call ordinances, so not really laws. But they're sort of the de facto government of Virginia for a while, until Virginia forms a new constitution. Adam Stephen gets elected to the Third Virginia Convention, but he's rigged his election. So the sheriff is the guy who's in charge of calling the election. He's supposed to post on the church door when people are supposed to show up to vote. And he has done this in a way that certain people are going to see it and other people are not, and gets himself elected. Well, the Height family says, aha, we got you now. And so they circulate this petition and they send it to the convention down in the Tidewater, detailing in great detail how Adam Stephen has rigged his own election. And the convention investigated and they expelled him from the convention and sent him home. It's not the only time that Adam Stephen got himself into trouble, but one of the first ones. Okay, Jacob Height, meanwhile, has moved down to the south. The war is starting to really pick up, and one of the things that the British are doing is firing up the Indians. trying to get the Cherokee in the southwest and the Shawnee in the northeast to engage as their proxies. So in the southwest, we call it the Cherokee War of 1776. It's really sort of part of the revolution. Jacob Haight is killed, along with his entire family, by the Cherokee. So that's the last you hear about him. The war has begun. The colony first raises 2 regiments, the 1st and the 2nd Virginia regiments. Patrick Henry was the colonel of the 1st regiment. He was not really qualified for the job, but he was really popular, so he got the job anyway, and then he washed out. William Woodford was the colonel of the 2nd Virginia regiment. I just gave a presentation on how all of this worked. You can watch it on YouTube if you want more details. Then in December of 1775, the 4th Virginia Convention decides, okay, we need 7 more regiments because we are really at war. This is the real deal. So the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Virginia regiments are authorized. One of them is special, and that's the 8th Virginia Regiment. All the other regiments have 10 companies. 8 of them are supposed to carry muskets, and 2 of them are supposed to carry rifles. And the riflemen do sort of skirmishing and ambushing and reconnaissance. Muskets are not really good for anything other than lining up and shooting. The advantage of a musket is that it reloads very quickly. Rifles take a while to reload, so they're very, very different tools. The 8th Virginia Regiment is all rifles for a couple of different reasons. One, there are not that many muskets in Virginia. Nobody's making muskets here, and the muskets that exist are old, dusty, rusty ones from the French and Indian War, and there just aren't that many of them. But in the valley here, we have people making rifles. The American long rifle was invented in Pennsylvania, carried down the wagon road, and there were prominent rifle makers in Winchester, in Shepherdstown, and in Stanton, and probably other places as well. So the convention knew that there were rifles out here. The rifle was also a tool for hunting, primarily. And if you are in one of these true frontier counties, like Fincastle County, or the West Augusta District, which was technically part of Augusta County, but was really its own territory, or Hampshire County, you probably were a pretty good rifleman because you were probably hunting deerskin for a living or as part of your living, and also for defense. They had Indian wars fairly frequently, and they just had a major one in 1774. So it was a fair guess that men from the West were crack shots. Now, on this side of the Allegheny Ridge, this was sort of Dad's or Grandpa's frontier, right, at this point. So people in the Shenandoah Valley were not necessarily such good riflemen as people on the other side. But nonetheless, the people in Williamsburg didn't make the distinction, and they just figured everybody up here was a crack shot, and we're going to carry a rifle. So the other thing that makes the 8th Virginia unique is Peter Muhlenberg, right? So the convention wanted to raise a German regiment. And this is a little bit complicated. It wasn't just Germans. It was Germans and Scotch-Irish, probably in roughly equal numbers. I would guess 40%, 40%, and the rest English and other. What they were worried about, I think, was that the Germans were not going to enlist and they weren't going to engage in the war. Some of them were pacifists, Mennonites. They were culturally a little bit different than the rest of people. They'd come fairly recently. There's some religious reasons. They were Protestants that the king had sort of taken care of and helped them get here from Catholic tyranny in the old country. So they weren't quite sure that they would fight. So their solution was to put Peter Muhlenberg, Abraham Bowman, and this guy Peter Helfenstein from Winchester in charge as field officers, all 3 Germans, and that would encourage Germans to enlist. I think they also wanted to make sure that Germans were in charge and not Scotch-Irish. The line I use is that if they weren't sure the Germans were going to fight, the opposite was true for the Scotch-Irish. That maybe the Scotch-Irish needed to settle down just a little bit, right? So that was the origin of the 8th Virginia. I think people often think that because of the Peter Muhlenberg story that the entire regiment was from Shenandoah County. Not true, and you can see that right here. So on the left, you see the company captains. You've got 2 companies from West Augusta, so that's basically from Pittsburgh, right? 1 from Berkeley County, 2 from Dunmore County, 1 from Culpeper, 1 from Hampshire, 1 from Augusta, 1 from Frederick, and 1 from that giant Fincastle County down there at the bottom. So it was really the entire frontier, all of it except for Botetourt County. Okay, there he is. There's Peter Muhlenberg. It's a picture that you didn't grow up saying because when you were kids, people didn't know it existed. It's in private hands. The family, in fact, still owns it. And that's Peter Muhlenberg's signature at the top. Abraham Bowman, in fact, it says Abraham Bowman, Lieutenant Colonel, 8th Virginia Regiment. And then Peter Helfenstein. You don't hear much about Peter Helfenstein. His grave was unmarked for a long time. He's at Hebron Church. The SAR recently marked his grave. He was the major. He died from complications of malaria during the war. And I think it deserves to be remembered better. I showed you a little bit of genealogy for the Heights. I wanted to just quickly show you the pedigree that Peter Muhlenberg had. So his grandfather was a refugee from the Rhineland in Germany, just like Yost Height. They may, in fact, have come on the same boat. They certainly came at the same time to upstate New York as really religious refugees. The little colony that they had up there, they were supposed to make tar from pine trees. It didn't work too well. So they worked out their indentures and then left. Yost Height moved to Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. I showed you his house. Conrad Weiser moved closer to Reading in Pennsylvania. Conrad Weiser, there's a school district named after him. He's remembered locally, but he doesn't get the attention he deserves. He was a big, big deal in Pennsylvania history. He became, his parents, when they were still in New York, allowed him to go live with the Mohawk Indians for a year. Like, not as an exchange student. I don't know what the deal was, but he got to go live with the Indians for a year. So he was fluent in their language, and he became really Pennsylvania's primary diplomat in Indian diplomacy for many years. And his daughter, Anna Maria, married Henry Muhlenberg, who was sent from Germany as a Lutheran missionary to organize the Lutheran Church in America in the 1740s. And Peter is their son. So that family was very important. Peter had several siblings. I have them all listed there. Frederick Muhlenberg was the first Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. Peter was in Congress too. They belonged to opposite parties, by the way, kind of interesting. Henry Ernst Muhlenberg was a famous botanist and the first president of my alma mater, Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania. I could tell you more about the other kids, but that's the 3 famous ones. This is the Height family with more of the kids. And this is just, if they are outlined in white, they were in the 8th Virginia Regiment. And remember, they all hated Adam Stephen. Okay, so that's going to become important later. Okay, so when the 8th Virginia is recruited, the way this works, the field officers are appointed in Williamsburg or wherever the Virginia Convention meets. But the company officers, the captains, the lieutenants, the ensign, they're appointed by the local committee of safety, or what they were really just called the county committee. So the Dunmore Committee was given a quota of 2 companies, and one of them went to Richard Campbell, who was a deputy sheriff. And these are the men in his company when they first enlisted early in 1776. There may be some names there that are still in the community. You see Matthias Height there. Leonard Cooper there. He lost his leg in a duel and ended up drowning in the Shenandoah River because he couldn't stay on his horse. There are stories about many of these guys. So I could pause there. I will say that there are 30 names missing from this list, probably because they were all dead when the first list was taken. The first year of service is very, very difficult. Here's Matthias Height's commission. You can see his name there. The other company was Jonathan Clark's company. So Jonathan Clark was originally from Caroline County, and when Dunmore was split off from Frederick County, they needed they needed people like Tim to run the place, right? So most of those people were recruited from the Tidewater or the Piedmont. And he came up here to be the deputy county clerk under Thomas Marshall. Thomas Marshall, you probably know, was the father of John Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall. I don't think Thomas Marshall ever did a lick of work in the job. The deal was that Jonathan Clark would do all of the work and he would get 1/3 of the pay. So, interestingly, when these two companies were appointed, one was designated the German company and the other one was designated the English company. Clark's company was the German company, even though he wasn't German. And you will see some names up here that you've seen already. There's Jonathan Clark, Jacob Rinker, Taverner Beale I've mentioned. That's the oldest Rinker house out there in Connicksville. Then in 1777, actually in 1776 for service in 77, Virginia decided that it needed even more regiments. So it authorized the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th regiments. And the 12th was recruited in a territory somewhat similar to the 8th Virginia. These are the counties that recruited. The Dunmore Company, the captain, his name was Jonathan Langdon, and I haven't been able to find out much about him. Does anybody know anything about Jonathan Langdon? If you do, I want to talk to you. I even asked Zach, and you're going to dig in some cardboard boxes for me, right? Or let me do some digging? Okay, more likely I'll do the digging. So now, remember I said Patrick Henry and William Woodford had two companies early on? They had 1-year enlistments. The 8th Virginia and those other companies, they had 2-year enlistments. These guys had 3-year enlistments, but they were encouraged to enlist for the entire war. And if they did, they would get land out west when it was over. That was the inducement. So that's Langdon's company. I've been unable to find out who his second lieutenant was. And there was another Frederick County company that was raised just across the creek, so I figured I would list that one too.
President Neville?
Yes. I get asked this a lot. If there's money involved, I will claim that I'm related, but I'm not related. This is a muster roll from Jonathan Langdon's company from June 1777. It's the earliest one that survives. So, the 8th Virginia has been in service for a year. They went down south to Charleston, South Carolina for the Battle of Sullivan's Island. They got malaria, a bunch of them died. They hobbled home. They recruited to fill the vacancies that resulted from malaria, and then they got sent east to serve under George Washington. The 12th Virginia, which has just been created, is also sent east to serve under George Washington, and they're both put in Charles Scott's brigade together. So you'll see down there the 4th Virginia, 8th Virginia, 12th Virginia, and a couple of what they called additional continental regiments were brigaded together. So under Charles Scott's. Now you see who the Major General is. Everybody's supposed to boo at this point. Boo, Adam Stephen. Do you remember the guy, Daniel Hendrick, that broke down the jail door with an axe? He's been in the 8th Virginia this whole time. Literally the same month that Adam Stephen becomes the Major General, Daniel Hendricks disappears from the rolls with no explanation. He's just gone. I think he didn't want to be around a Major General who hated him. So, and they served at Brandywine, in Germantown, and at Valley Forge together. So at Germantown, Peter Muhlenberg has been promoted. He's now a brigadier general. And he gets just a little bit technical. It's the only time I'm going to get technical. Congress told Washington that he could not have lieutenant generals. right? So you've got a brigadier general, and above them is a major general, and then above them would be a lieutenant general. In the British Army, they had lieutenant generals. Congress wouldn't agree with that. So a lieutenant general's job would be to command a wing in an army. And the way Washington organized his men for battle is he would have a left wing and a right wing and a reserve, each of which would have had a lieutenant general in charge. But Congress wouldn't let him do that. So what he had to do was elevate a brigadier general, or a major general from one of his divisions to command a wing, which created a vacancy. So they would then elevate a brigadier general from a brigade to command the division. And when he did that, that created a vacancy. So he had to elevate a colonel from a regiment to command a brigade, which means that you've got a whole bunch of senior officers commanding people they're not used to commanding, right? A problem. So at the Battle of Germantown, Nathaniel Greene has been elevated from his division to command a wing. This is the left wing. Peter Muhlenberg has been elevated from his brigade to command Greene's division. A soldier from the 9th Virginia Regiment is commanding Muhlenberg's brigade. You see who's commanding the other division? Adam Stephen, okay? Now, Muhlenberg has never done this before. He's a total rookie at commanding a wing in an army, or a division for that matter. Stephen has done it before, and he thinks he knows everything. He's only done it for about 6 months, by the way, but he thinks he knows everything. So in the battle, he's trying to run his division and Peter Muhlenberg's. He's being bossy, and he's giving orders to men who are literally not under his command. And what happens is, so you see those numbers there, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and CT, that's the Connecticut Brigade. They're supposed to be in a straight line of battle. But they start to break apart because nobody's really in charge. And they've got fences they got to climb over and houses they've got to walk around. And they're supposed to surprise a picket. So that's like a lookout post of redcoats at Lucan's Mill there. Turns out, though, there's a picket all the way up here. So that's where the battle starts. So there's some firing there, and then the British picket, they run all the way down here to Lucan's Mill. And Adam Stevens says, we got to catch those guys. So he tells the 9th Virginia Regiment, go get them. So they go running off to go catch these redcoats down at Lucan's Mill. And then he thinks about it and he says, I don't think that's enough guys. Hey, 8th Virginia Regiment, go help the 9th. So Colonel Bowman is the colonel at this time, Abraham Bowman, but he's sick. He's not there. So you've got another guy named Lieutenant Colonel John Markham, who is in charge, but he's also never commanded in battle before. And he balks. He says, no, I'm not going. So some of the men go forward and some don't, creating even more confusion. And the 9th and part of the 8th, they do capture some redcoats down here at Lucan's Mill. And they're expecting this entire line to come down and support them. But they take forever because they're disorganized, and they break apart even more. And as they proceed, the right wing is coming this way under General John Sullivan. Anthony Wayne's division is there, and look here. You've got the 3rd and 4th brigades. The 4th is the 8th Virginia and the 12th Virginia, approaching on the front side of Wayne's flank, and the 3rd Brigade approaching behind Wayne's flank. And nobody can see anything because it's early in the morning and it's very foggy and everybody's been shooting black gunpowder. So you can't see more than 6 or 7 feet in front of you. So they start shooting at each other because they think it's the bad guys. And chaos ensues. Now, most people blame the chaos at the battle on Washington's cannonade on this house here, Cliveden, and that did matter. But the left wing, which was supposed to really push the redcoats into the Schuylkill River, which is down here, it fell apart because Adam Stephen was not minding his own business. I mean, that's really the bottom line. So marshals, Adam Stephen gets fired. Matthias Height gets fired. Actually, he quits because Washington says we're not going to have poor soldiers as officers anymore. And he's going to get court-martialed, so he quits. John Markham, the lieutenant colonel that was filling in for Abraham Bowman, he got fired. So there was heck to pay after the Battle of Germantown. This is kind of a non sequitur, but I found this and I wanted to show it to you. This is a petition from the citizens of Dunmore County to the House of Delegates, or the General Assembly of Virginia. We now have a new constitution with a Senate and a General Assembly. This is a petition to the General Assembly asking them to dissolve the parish vestry. So this is significant in part because the rector of the parish used to be Peter Muhlenberg, right? So we still had a state church back then. The Church of England was the official church of Virginia. And everybody was a parishioner whether they wanted to be or not, and they paid taxes to it. In fact, it was the biggest tax that Virginians paid back then. And the vestry, when a county was created, they were elected, there were 12 of them, and then it was self-perpetuating. If somebody retired, then the rest of the vestry would pick their replacement. But so many of the members of the vestry had gone off to war and died that the citizens wrote and said, you need to dissolve the vestry and create a new one because it's no longer functioning. So that just shows you how committed and how fully engaged this county was in the Revolution. Anybody of fighting age in the vestry was gone, and half of them had died. That's zooming in on it. That's the text of it. You can read it quickly if you want to. I love these old petitions. They all start, humbly sheweth. And there's signatures. There might be some names that are familiar if you're able to read them. Okay, so Isaac Height, I wanted to mention him again. So he was not in the war early on, but in about 1780, or I think it was 1780, he got a commission as a lieutenant. And I'm not sure what his initial appointment was, but he was very, very soon plucked by Peter Muhlenberg as his aide-de-camp. If you're a brigadier general, you get a lieutenant as an aide-de-camp. And he was Peter Muhlenberg's aide-de-camp through, I think, the end of the war. And then, he came home and built Belgrove. There is, however, another Isaac Height, the exact same name, who was very prominent in Kentucky. They're first cousins, and that is his house in Kentucky. If you read very early Kentucky history, there was another Isaac Height. They were probably about the same age, and that is his house and a historic marker in front of his home. And here is the genealogy again. I just wanted you to see. So this is Isaac Height of Kentucky, the son of Abraham Height. And here's Isaac Height of Belgrove, the son of Isaac Height Sr. So kind of fun. Here's Kentucky. War's over now, or it's over for many of the men we're talking about anyway. This is the Kentucky River here. This is, I think, the earliest map of Kentucky. And remember, soldiers got land in the West after the war. Before that, Virginia opened much of Kentucky to people who wanted to buy a treasury warrant, or if they'd been very, very early settlers, they would get a preemption warrant, which basically meant free land because you get a prize for going early. And the early settlers, sometimes they would build a fort. More often, they would have a small settlement that was semi-fortified, and they referred to them as stations. Down here at the bottom, if you can read it, right in the center of that circle, that is Bowman Station. That was created by Abraham Bowman in 1779. He and two of his brothers and Isaac Height of Kentucky, they started sort of a land company, and they bought several acres around here with Bowman Station in the center. And Abraham led sort of a wagon train of settlers to Kentucky in 1779, going into a truly horrible winter. One man died. A few years later, Abraham Bowman moved to Lexington, where his log cabin still survives, as does a bigger house that was built later. Now, you might remember that when I showed the full height, or the full Bowman family tree, there was an Elizabeth, a sister named Elizabeth, who married a man named Isaac Ruddle. They moved Ruddle's Station. Where is it? It actually says Riddle's Station. So late in the Revolutionary War, 1782, if I remember right. This is after Yorktown, everything's settled down in the east, but the war is still going full bore out west, mostly through Indian proxies. The Ruddles were captured by Indians, the whole family, and they were marched north to Detroit. The youngest baby was, I hate to say it, burned to death intentionally. They did this. And the two youngest sons were adopted, is the term that is usually used. Forcible adoption doesn't seem like a thing to me, but that's what they called it. Stephen and Abraham Ruddle down there, they were adopted into the Shawnee tribe. Isaac and Elizabeth were, quote, sold to the British and carted to Montreal and lived there in captivity for 3 or 4 years until the war ended. Stephen and Abraham grew up basically as Shawnee Indians. Stephen was old enough to remember not being an Indian. Abraham really wasn't. And this is the amazing thing. How many of you have heard of the Indian chief Tecumseh? So several of you. So he was a very prominent Shawnee Indian chief, very active during the War of 1812. William Tecumseh Sherman was named after him. He organized a pan-tribal Indian confederacy particularly in the 1810s, and he was a very big deal and a very serious threat to the United States. Stephen Ruddle later wrote, he says, "I first became acquainted with Tecumseh at the age of 12 years. And being the same age myself, we became inseparable companions." So he grew up with Tecumseh, went to war with Tecumseh, fought Anthony Wayne, fought in other battles as an Indian. Now, we don't learn about it in school anymore, but there was a major war with the Indians in Ohio and Indiana in the 1790s. It's called the Northwest Indian War. And there were significant American defeats in this war. In 1791, Arthur St. Clair lost more soldiers than in any other American battle until the Civil War. It was a very serious war. Anthony Wayne went out west eventually and won the war at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The Treaty of Greenville was signed after that in 1795, and one of the provisions was that the Shawnee and the other Indians had to return all of their white captives, including children who had been quote-unquote adopted. So this includes the Ruddle boys. And the officer who was looking for them, Isaac and Elizabeth are back in Kentucky, hoping that they'll see their boys again one day. And an American Army officer is up there in northern Ohio, and he's going around asking Indians and exchange captives, does anybody know Stephen Ruddle? Does anybody know Abraham Ruddle? And there's this Indian sitting against a tree. And he beats on his chest, he says, me, Stephen Ruddle. It was Stephen Ruddle, and he could still speak some English. Abraham couldn't speak a word of English. So they were returned. And that, in a little town in Arkansas, is the grave of Abraham Ruddle. He never, as I understand it, he never fully became comfortable in white, European civilization, as they would have said then. But that's his grave and his wife's grave. So that's the last slide of the presentation. The important thing I think from all of this history is that we think, and people call St. Louis the gateway to the West, right? If you rewind another 100 years, the Great Wagon Road, Route 11, that was the Oregon Trail long before the Oregon Trail was the Oregon Trail. Many of these soldiers who fought in the Revolution, the only pay they ever got for their service was land in the West. And so they went west, just like the Bowmans did. So many of the greatest soldiers in Shenandoah County history left as soon as the war was over and went west and built the country that we know today. So that's my old website. That is the website I have that's about the 8th Virginia Regiment. So lots of emphasis, of course, on Shenandoah County. I have a newer website which is expanding the aperture to all of Virginia in the Revolutionary War. You might want to take a look at that. I have a Facebook feed where something goes out almost every day, just some little tidbit about Virginia Revolutionary War history. I have videos on YouTube. I'm recording this, so you can see this right here. There'll be a version of this on YouTube in a few days. And of course, there's the book. I worked on the research for this for about 20 years. I have an ancestor who was in one of the Pittsburgh companies, so that was the genesis of it. I was interested in Peter Muhlenberg because he was from Pennsylvania, as I am, and then moved to Virginia, as I did. And like any hobby, it stuck with me, and the more I got into it, the more obsessed I got. And 20 years later, here's a book. So it's got lots of pictures in it. People like pictures. It's 468 pages long, and I think it's safe to say it's the most detailed regimental history there is for the Revolutionary War. And my approach was not to do the usual thing and say that, the regiment marched here and they shot at the bad guys there and then they marched over here and General so-and-so said such and such. This is really about the men in the regiment. So I start, with Abraham Bowman, who was a boy in the French and Indian War, trying to rescue that girl whose family had just been attacked and that Bible burned. And then it ends in the 1820s in Kentucky when they're old men. So I think you'll like it, and I've got a box of them here if you want to buy one. So thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun. I may have gone over, but do we have time for questions, or should we just proceed? Sure, go ahead. Yeah, does anybody have a question? People want to go home. No question? Yes?
Yes, Steve. Have you been able to capture any information and their families during this time that either participated in the Revolutionary era or somewhere back?
The black population out here was much sparser than it was in Tidewater and Piedmont, Virginia. Slavery was not as common out here, but it did exist. Richard Campbell, who led one of the two Shenandoah County companies, he owned some slaves. They did a census in 1775 for militia purposes, and he actually did his own neighborhood, and he lists how many people he owned. I think it was 5, if I remember right. I've not been able to determine that there were any African Americans in the 8th Virginia Regiment. And that's really been my focus. Other people have focused on this, and there were free black men in other regiments in Virginia. What is super interesting is that other southern states also either talked about it or did it. Most notably, South Carolina, which was, I hate to say it, but that state was built on slavery, right? Slavery didn't start in South Carolina the way it did in Virginia. Slavery was a colony of Barbados. Barbados was one of those sugar islands that were just intensely, that was just intensely profitable, and they literally didn't want to waste land in Barbados growing food to feed the slaves. So they colonized South Carolina to grow rice to send back to Barbados. So South Carolina was literally created on slavery. You can't say that about Virginia the same way. Henry Lawrence, who was the president of the Continental Congress after John Hancock, he was maybe the #1 slave trader in America. But he read in the Bible that slavery was wrong in the book of Revelation and started to think, maybe this isn't a good thing. And his son, John Lawrence, traveled to England and hung out with a bunch of people who were pretty convinced that slavery was evil and started corresponding with his dad. And Henry Lawrence wrote an extended letter to his son saying that he hated slavery and he wanted to get rid of it. John Lawrence wanted to recruit an entire regiment of freed slaves in South Carolina, and the South Carolina legislature wouldn't let it. He had congressional authorization to do it, but they wouldn't let him. Christopher Gadsden, most notably, said no. John Lawrence was killed after Yorktown at a small battle at Combahee River. Henry Lawrence corresponded with Alexander Hamilton, who was basically John's best friend, saying that he was trying to convince the South Carolina leadership to get rid of slavery, and all he was doing was making people mad. So he gave up. John Lawrence was just like Alexander Hamilton. Same stature, same prominence, very close to George Washington. If he had lived, I just wonder how history would have been